If you're a lefty, if you're a Democrat, and you absolutely adore the environment, I hope you watch this video. If you're a Republican and you're sick of all the lies and the BS and you want to do your own thing and actually be able to afford a future for you and your children to achieve dreams, I really hope you watch this video too. It's hard to argue with numbers, and that's why I ran some on my Omega car concept, which recently got 104.72 miles per gallon on straight diesel and matched the acceleration curve 0 to 60 of a Tesla Model 3. So I decided to compare those two cars on the cost to run them for a 100-mile distance, as well as how much greenhouse gas is emitted from actually driving them 100 miles. The Omega car costs $3.45 of diesel for 100 mile of driving. The Tesla, if you consider the national average at an at-home charge, is $4.65. And if you have to charge it at a supercharging station, that number goes up to $6.85. My Omega car on diesel beating it. But what about greenhouse gas and CO2 emissions, Casey? Well, when you consider the equivalencies and what diesel emits, it ends up being 21.201 pounds. And a Tesla, if we consider the national average of greenhouse gas emitted for all the different ways to generate electricity, it ends up being 23.53 pounds of CO2 gas, which is more than mine on diesel. And if you consider what coal burning for electricity does, it ends up being 64.61 pounds from coal, which is terrible because even my 1994 Corvette beat that greenhouse gas emissions. So long story short, this is a story on how I arrived at these numbers and why my car on diesel that I built 10 years ago as one guy who decided to use his brain is beating the best thing we've got of EVs right now, which are being mandated by an idiotic left trying to seize power. It is the weekend and I am not in the shop today with the Omega car. However, I've done some research and some math that I think you guys are going to find interesting after reading a text from a friend of mine. Now, the research and math relates to the Omega car, the fact that it's getting 104.72 miles to the gallon on diesel alone. Obviously, it's very fast, 0 to 60 in 4.61, effectively matching that of a Tesla Model 3. So I wanted to compare the car and its efficiencies, as well as its carbon footprint, to the Tesla Model 3. But in any case, what inspired that is this text from a friend. And after my video a couple weeks ago when I said what I was going to do, he writes, "I like what you're saying about electric vehicles. It reminds me of a time I was hanging out with Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, and he was telling me that his Tesla Model S was actually less efficient than some gas-powered vehicles. So I ran some numbers. If the Omega's fuel efficiency is 104.7 miles to the gallon, and you drive it 200,000 miles over 10 years, you'd use 1,910.9 gallons of diesel. 1 gallon of diesel contains 38.6 kilowatt hours of energy. So the total energy consumption for 200,000 miles is the 1910.9 times 38.6 is 73,814 kilowatt hours. Just some preliminary research indicates the typical EV consumes around 178,000 kilowatt hours over the same range. But for the sake of comparison, I did a calculation for a 2008 Tesla Roadster. That was the early one built on the Lotus Elise chassis. Not going to bore you with the details of that calculation, but including battery production and grid generation losses, you're looking at least 120,911 kilowatt hours used over 200,000 miles. Probably more than that, to be honest. That means your vehicle is at least 38.94% more efficient than a 2008 Tesla Roadster. By the way, guys, I'm going to go way deeper in this, so calm down on your comments. With that said, the original Roadster was, surprisingly, quite a bit lighter and more efficient than modern EVs, even with the improvements to battery technology. I'm guessing you're already run a calculation like this, but I was curious and thought you'd appreciate my analysis. Well, I do. Now, to be perfectly honest, I am not a nerd. The extent of my nerdness is having seen every of the Star Trek original series and Next Gen and things like that. But when it comes to building cars, I'm more of a down and dirty, does this effing work? And is it going to be good business sense? Let's go out and do it rather than sit on SolidWorks for the next 3 years. So that's what I did. But in any case, I did a bunch of numbers here because I wanted to, I didn't want to just take this as gospel. So he did some research. So I did my own. So here we go. Diesel has the equivalent of 37.95 kilowatt hours of energy by the EPA. Biodiesel is like 35.04 kilowatt hours of energy. Now, kilowatt hours of energy is basically a measurement of how much electricity is in the bucket. Let's not worry about flow or usage in that regard, but just how much can the batteries hold and how much are you going to use of your electricity juice. And then gasoline, as an example, as a base, has 33.41 kilowatt hours of energy. Okay, so let's move on. Diesel in America, the average cost is $3.61. The average cost of 1 kilowatt hour of energy is 17 cents. Now, at a supercharger station on average for Teslas and EVs, it's going to be 25 cents per kilowatt hour. The Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive, which is what I directly compared my Omega car to 0 to 60, because it's also rear-wheel drive. I thought that's a fair comparison. I did that run with a full charge, and its first run done perfectly was 4.60 seconds 0 to 60. Every 0 to 60 run after that immediately started decreasing. The Omega car's fastest run, which is what it would do on average, or what it would continuously do because it's, of course, internal combustion, is 4.61 seconds. So for all intents and purposes, identical acceleration to the Tesla Model 3. Well, Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive has a 57.5 kilowatt hour battery. And looking at the average real-world ranges of those, it's about 210 miles with a full charge. Now, let's not go into all the other models and things like that. Let's just use this for now and getting through it, guys. I also saw some things up here. Let's see, I'm going to go past these average things because that's more hearsay. So, per 100 miles of driving, the Omega car will use 0.955 gallons of diesel at 104.72 miles a gallon, real-world driving. Now, 0.955 gallons of diesel has the equivalent of 36.236 kilowatt hours of energy in it, which is done by simply taking the diesel EPA kilowatt hour equivalency of 37.95 and multiplying it by 0.955. That's how I got the 36.236. And a Tesla 3 rear-wheel drive is going to use the kilowatt hours of 27.38, which I got by saying, okay, and that's going by a 57.5 kilowatt hour battery, and then looking at its range about being 210 miles. So that's how I got that. That's how I took those factors in consideration. I wanted to know the cost to run the Omega car versus the Tesla 100 miles. So the Omega car at a $3.61 gallon of diesel average in the United States right now will cost $3.45 to drive 100 miles. Let's not worry about maintenance and all that jazz. We're just talking fuel, okay? And I think that's important here. The Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive will cost, if you charge it at home, I looked up the average price of electricity in the United States per kilowatt hour, and it is 17 cents per kilowatt hour. So 17 cents times 27.38 kilowatt hours is $4.65. The Omega car costs $3.45 per gallon of diesel, or excuse me, $3.45 of diesel to drive 100 miles, and the Tesla Model 3 costs $4.65 100 miles to drive it on electricity if you charge it at home. The Tesla is more expensive by a large margin there. Now, if you use a supercharger station, which is more expensive at 25 cents per kilowatt hour on average, it's going to cost you $6.85 to drive it 100 miles, which is nearly double the cost to the consumer to drive their Tesla Model 3 100 miles versus my Omega car 100 miles. Let's keep going because cost is not everything. We have to think of carbon, don't we? Yes, and I did that math too. Range. The Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive with perfect real-world battery is about 210 miles on a full charge. The Tesla Model 3 long range, I'm reading, is about 340 miles on a full charge. Well, the Omega car's got a 5-gallon tank, and rear-wheel driving, I'm getting over 100 miles a gallon, 104.7. So I just put down 500 miles range. which is more than double of the Tesla Model 3, and it's quite a lot higher than the Tesla Model 3 long range at 340 miles. But you know, the funny thing is, the average vehicle in America has, I'd say, at least a 15-gallon tank. And even in my Omega car prototype, I can put in a bigger fuel tank. So I just wanted to go out there and say, with a 15-gallon tank, I have over a 1,500-mile range. That is a multiplication of what a Tesla is capable of. Let's keep going, though. 1 pound of coal that is burned to produce electricity creates 2.07 pounds of carbon dioxide gas. 1 gallon of diesel produces 22.2 pounds of carbon dioxide gas. 1 gallon of base gasoline produces 19 pounds of carbon dioxide gas, which is actually less than diesel, but keep in mind that gasoline is less energy dense than diesel. Now, here's where this gets interesting. The coal equivalent to create electricity, to then charge an electric car and drive it a certain miles. If you consider that for this reason, the coal equivalent of 1 gallon of diesel is 43.26 pounds of coal. That's what the equivalent energy density is. You need 43.26 pounds of coal to equal 1 gallon of gasoline. And we know that 1 pound of coal produces 2.07 pounds of CO2 emissions, carbon dioxide gas. So 2.07 pounds of CO2 emissions times 43.26 pounds of actual coal produces 89.55 pounds of CO2 gas, greenhouse gas emissions. So the equivalent coal energy to 1 gallon of diesel is 89.55 pounds of CO2 gas. But 1 gallon of diesel produces 22.2 pounds of CO2 gas. Quite a lot less. I would go so say it's less than 1/4 of the emissions of coal. You may know where we're going with this, but stay on because there's a lot more to this. Okay, so the interesting thing is, if I look at the energy in coal, okay, to produce electricity in a perfect laboratory theoretical environment, I'm not even considering all of the losses and all the degradation over the systems, which is huge. Let's just consider it's perfect, which it's not. The amount of coal to drive a Tesla Model 3 100 miles, it takes 27.38 kilowatt hours to drive a Tesla Model 3 100 miles. I spoke about that earlier, yes, when I talked about the cost to run it. Okay, so 27.38 kilowatt hours to drive a Tesla Model 3 100 miles. Now, I did this math, or I looked this up. 1 kilowatt hour of electricity requires 1.14 pounds of coal to be burned to create that 1 kilowatt hour. Okay, cool. So we take the 27.38 kilowatt hours of electricity juice to drive that Tesla Model 3 100 miles, and we're going to multiply by 1.14 pounds of coal. Sorry, I'm going to an accent. I just do it for fun. Not like Kamala when she's trying to dupe people that she thinks is stupider than them to think that she's like one of them. Okay, so 27.38 kilowatt hours times 1.14 pounds of coal. And that means it requires 31.21 pounds of actual coal to be burned to create electricity juice to fuel your Tesla 100 miles. Not even considering all of the losses in the systems going from burning to electricity to torque to the wheels, right? Okay. So 31.21 pounds of coal. So how much CO2 greenhouse gas is emitted to drive that Tesla Model 3 100 miles in a perfect magical world? Well, 31.21 pounds of coal to do so times 2.07 pounds of carbon dioxide gas, which is the emission per pound of coal, is 64.61 pounds of CO2 gas is emitted. Greenhouse gas, piss off Greta Thunberg gas, 64.61 pounds of CO2 gas is emitted to drive your Tesla Model 3 100 miles. In a real world, which this is not. That's not considering the losses. The actual number is going to be greater, potentially much greater, but we're going to talk about that later. So 64.61 pounds CO2 to drive the Tesla Model 3 100 miles. The amount of diesel I need to drive my Omega car concept 100 miles is 0.955 gallon of diesel. It's less than a gallon of diesel. The amount of CO2 that we get of greenhouse gases from me driving my Omega car 100 miles is that 0.955 gallon of diesel to drive the 100 miles times the 22.2 pounds of CO2 emissions created buy 1 gallon of diesel and I get 21.201 pounds of CO2 gas to drive my Omega car 100 miles. Let's keep going, okay? So currently my Omega car is creating 21.201 pounds of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions to drive it diesel 100 miles, but the Tesla is 64.61 pounds of CO2 if you're making your electricity from coal, which is a relatively small percentage of the actual entirety of US electrical grid creation, so I'm going to come to that too. But my diesel car is vastly more efficient. It's more than 3 times more efficient or less CO2 emissions to drive my car on diesel 100 miles versus the Tesla Model 3 generating electricity from coal. It's 3 times. That is I'll use my own personal measurement as an FT, and the last word is ton, and the first word rhymes with schmuck. My 1994 Corvette 6-speed I had years ago, it's a C4, a late one there. I remember one time I got 34 miles to the gallon driving it on the highway. And I thought about it. If I were to drive that old Corvette 100 miles at that miles per gallon, which I'd done, you would have burned 2.94 gallons of gasoline. Now, the kilowatt hours to drive that Corvette 100 miles would be the 2.94 gallons of gasoline times the 33.41 kilowatt hour equivalency of a gallon of base gasoline, which was given to me by the EPA. So that would be 98.23 kilowatt hours of energy to drive that gasoline old Corvette 100 miles. Well, the CO2 emissions to drive the Corvette on base gasoline 100 miles is going to be the 2.94 gallons of fuel times 19 pounds of carbon emissions CO2 gas, which we knew that by looking at the gasoline burning equivalents of 19 pounds. So long story short, to drive that old Corvette 100 miles, it's 55.86 pounds of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. So if you take a Tesla Model 3 that charges up based upon burning coal at 64.6 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. To drive my old Tamick 6-speed 1994 Corvette, that 100 miles is only 55.86 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions, which is less than the Tesla. And then my Omega car on diesel is only 21.201 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. This is why people are getting pissed off and say, hey, your Tesla's fueled by coal. In fact, my buddy who lent me his Tesla 3 has a license plate or a license plate frame that says coal keeps the lights on. But let's be fair. I looked up the average United States amount of CO2 produced per kilowatt hour anywhere in the world, okay? So if you're generating your electricity just from coal, you're going to create 2.07 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon dioxide gas. A little over 2. But the average United States carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions per kilowatt hour is only 0.86, which is less than half. Because the United States creates their electricity from many things. There's small amounts that's renewable, some of it's going to be nuclear, a large portion is natural gas, there's a good amount that's coal, and the list goes on. So I took the average. So let's be fair, the average anywhere in America, your greenhouse gas emission per kilowatt hour is 0.86 pounds of CO2. So I did that math for a Tesla, which is 23.55. On average, in America, to drive a Tesla Model 3 100 miles, you will have created 23.55 pounds of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. That's in a perfect world where there isn't massive losses on the system and going into other things. My Omega car prototype on straight diesel only emits 21.201 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions per 100 miles. So even the Tesla, in a perfect world, even taking the average of all the electricity generation in the United States, my Omega car is putting out a little over 2 less pounds of carbon dioxide gas per 100 miles than a Tesla Model 3. And a Tesla Model 3 is a current. It is a current, actual, highly refined car with billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of R&D and engineering put into it. My Omega car was done by me over a decade ago in a barn because I got tired of politicians like Obama lying to us all. And doing some basic math on reality says we're all being lied to. So I'm going to go into it. It's not just the power source, you guys. I wanted to use an internal combustion engine, a diesel, because people understand miles to the gallon better than they do kilowatt hours. And I said, okay, 100 miles to the gallon, 0 to 60 fast. My Omega car beat my Dodge Viper, equal to C7 Corvette Grand Sport, and equal to Tesla Model 3 0 to 60. And frankly, as the charge starts to whirl down, mine's faster than the Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive 0 to 60. So the car is real. For all the people that are going into things like worrying about the emissions of the diesel, well, we just went through that. They're worrying about how it's tuned, will it meet safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. You don't think me being in the smallest position of leadership or actually having some real funditure can't develop a car that I made with my own two hands and designed in my head that's now beating the national average of the electric vehicle? Electric vehicle, which is the benchmark for the entirety of the United States Democratic Party left and global left trying to mandate electric cars? Let's think here. Let's do a little basic thinking. Well, the thing beyond that for my Omega car was it was about manufacturing with a lower environmental impact, creating a car, i.e. the rolling chassis, because the Omega car and the philosophies of construction and design behind it can be used to create any vehicle, whether it's powered by natural gas, steam, nuclear, gasoline, diesel, or electric, it doesn't matter. I can make all of them more efficient by making the car itself more efficient and safer. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make something that is more sustainably recyclable. I wanted to make something that's lower environmental impact to produce. I wanted to make it more efficient. I wanted to make it cheaper so it's actually affordable. No one can afford new electric cars. They're insanely expensive. And they're throwaway. They're disposable tech. The batteries, that's a disaster. And think, the numbers I just gave you are not considering grid loss. Because to burn the coal, to produce the electricity, there's loss. Then to send that electricity in the power grid everywhere else, the reason I made this sound, that's loss. That's loss of power, literally to the atmosphere. And you have to send that to a grid, and it has to be converted and moved over. Nothing but loss on the system, loss on the system, loss on the system. To then plug in your car and charge it, loss on the system, inefficiencies. Whereas you produce the fuel, you put it in the car. You don't have that same amount of inefficiencies adding in there as well. You got to go into the entirety of how electric cars are produced. First of all, the way I want to produce cars is better than how we produce the rolling chassis of all of them. And that's not even going into the toxic batteries. Not to mention the human rights violations the world over for how we're creating the batteries. Batteries created in China, mined in Africa, with poor little black kids dying in mines that directly parallels the scene from Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea back when, which is what created Captain Nemo, because I think his wife and kid got killed in the slave mines of whatever, so he's beating up the slave. Guys, like, read history, read the book, watch the movie, I don't care. It's bad. The other thing that's a problem with electric cars, the people with power can turn them off. They can turn the grid off. It's susceptible to attack. Attack from within by greedy, corrupt powers. Attacks from outside. It's a method of control. Cars that can drive themselves, well, you're going to go where the system wants you to go. Like a exact real-world manifestation of the garbage algorithms that have made all of social media make humanity fight and push us back down. We also forgot about biodiesel. I can make the fuel that fuels my car and a million other things out of the waste oils from everything from agriculture to the meat industry. You can make diesel about out of anything. You know, I got to tell you what, guys. I'm not a big math guy. I'm more of a, is this going to work? Let's do it kind of guy. Because you don't change the world sitting on a computer. You change the world at the end of the day with what's in your brain and the action you take with your own two hands to create a better tomorrow. Sometimes that requires speaking to you all like I'm speaking right now. Sometimes it requires sticking your neck out like I'm seriously doing right now. Why are we getting screwed? Why are we believing this idiotic narrative that electric cars are magical savior? They're not. It's a direction of control. It's a way to put money from one pocket to another. It's nothing more than political power and control. And it's all a lie. If you're a lefty, if you're a Democrat, and you absolutely adore the environment, I hope you watch this video. If you're a Republican and you're sick of all the lies and the BS and you want to do your own thing and actually be able to afford a future for you and your children to achieve dreams, I really hope you watch this video too. Because we are all being lied to and we can do better. And you know what? I can build cars like this. I say like, using the same intelligence and direction and design philosophies with none of the bullshit here in the United States for the betterment of us and the world. But is that what we have? No. We have liar politicians. So the only thing I can say to you right now is you would have to hold a gun to my head to even have a shot of getting me to vote for a Democrat or Kamala Harris right now. I urge you to vote for Donald Trump. We have got to push back the lies and we have to save freedom of speech so that intelligent things like this and this effort that I've dedicated over the last 10 years of my life to do can actually be told. And we don't get sold into just whatever the powers that be want.